Chapter 5. Anne was cutting a vase full of June lilies for her room and another of Susan's peonies for Gilbert's desk in the library. The milky white peonies with the blood-red flecks at their hearts, like a god's kiss. The air was coming alive after the unusually hot June day, and one could hardly tell whether the harbor were silver or gold. "There's going to be a wonderful sunset tonight, Susan," she said, looking in at the kitchen window as she passed it. "I cannot admire the sunset until I've got my dishes washed, Mrs. Dr. dear," protested Susan. "It'll be gone by that time, Susan. Look at the enormous white cloud towering up over the hollow with its rosy pink top. Wouldn't you like to fly up and light on it?" Susan had a vision of herself flying up over the glen, dishcloth in hand, to that cloud. It did not appeal to her, but allowances must be made for Mrs. Doctor just now. "There's a new, vicious kind of bug eating the rose bushes," went on Anne. "I must spray them tomorrow." "I'd like to do it tonight. This is just the kind of evening I love to work in the garden. Things are growing tonight. I hope there will be gardens in heaven, Susan. Gardens we can work in, and help things to grow. But no bugs, surely," protested Susan. "No, I suppose not. But a completed garden wouldn't really be any fun, Susan. You have to work in a garden yourself or you miss its meaning. I want to weed and dig and transplant and change and plant and prune. And I want the flowers I love in heaven. I'd rather my own pansies than the asphodel, Susan." "Why cannot you put in the evening as you want to?" broke in Susan, who thought Mrs. Doctor was really going a little wild. "Because the doctor wants me to go for a drive with him. He's going to see poor old Mrs. John Paxton. She's dying, and he can't do her any good. He's done everything he can, but she does like to have him drop in." "Oh, well, Mrs. Doctor, dear, we all know that nobody can die or be born without him hereabouts, and it is a nice evening for a drive. I think I will take a walk down to the village myself and replenish our pantry after I put the twins and Shirley to bed, and manure Mrs. Aaron Ward. She isn't blooming as she ought to. Miss Blythe has just gone upstairs, sighing at every step, saying one of her headaches is coming on, so there will be a little peace and quiet for the evening at least. See that Jem goes to bed in a good time, will you, Susan?" said Anne as she went away through the evening that was like a cup of fragrance that has spilled over. "He's really much tireder than he thinks he is, and he never wants to go to bed. Walter's not coming home tonight. Leslie asked if he might stay there." Jem was sitting on the steps of the side door, one bare foot hooked over his knee, scowling viciously at things in general, and at an enormous moon behind the Glen Church spire in particular. Jem didn't like such big moons. "Take care your face doesn't freeze like that," Aunt Mary Maria had said as she passed him in on her way into the house. Jem scowled more blackly than ever. He didn't care if his face did freeze like that. He hoped it would. "Go away and don't come tagging after me all the time," he told Nan, who had crept out to him after Father and Mother had driven away. "Cross patch," said Nan, but before she trotted off, she laid down on the step beside him the red candy lion she had brought out to him. Jem ignored it. He felt more abused than ever. He wasn't being used right. Everybody picked on him. Hadn't Nan that very morning said, "You weren't born at Ingleside like the rest of us"? Died at his chocolate rabbit that forenoon, though she knew it was his rabbit. Even Walter had deserted him, going away to dig wells in the sand with Ken and Persis Ford. Great fun, that. And he wanted so much to go with Bertie to see the tattooing. Jem was sure he had never wanted anything so much in his life before. He wanted to see the wonderful, full-rigged ship that Bertie said was always on Captain Bill's mantelpiece. It was a mean shame, that's what it was. Susan brought him out a big slice of cake covered with maple frosting and nuts, but "No, thank you," said Jem stonily. Why hadn't she saved some of the gingerbread and cream for him? Suppose the rest of them had ate it all. Pigs! He plundered into a deeper gulf of gloom. The gang would be on their way to the harbor mouth by now. He just couldn't bear the thought. He'd got to do something to get square with folks, supposing he sliced Di's sawdust giraffe open on the living room rug. That would make old Susan mad. Susan with her nuts when she knew he hated nuts and frosting. Supposing he went and drew a mustache on that picture of the cherub on the calendar in her room. He had always hated that fat, pink, smiling cherub because it looked just like Sissy Flagg, who had told around school that Jem Blythe was her beau. Hers. Sissy Flagg, but Susan thought that cherub lovely. Supposing he scalped Nan's doll. Supposing he whacked the nose of Gog or Magog, or both of them. Maybe that would make Mother see he wasn't a baby any longer. Just wait till next spring. He had brought her Mayflowers for years and years and years, ever since he was 4, but he wouldn't do it next spring. No, sir. Supposing he ate a lot of the little green apples on the early tree and got nice and sick. Maybe that would scare them. Supposing he never washed behind his ears again. Supposing he made faces at everybody in church next Sunday. Oh, supposing he put a caterpillar on Aunt Mary Maria, a big striped woolly caterpillar. Supposing he ran away to the harbor and hid in Captain David Reese's ship and sailed out over the harbor in the morning on this way to South America. Would they be sorry then? Supposing he never came back. Supposing he went hunting jaguars in Brazil. Would they be sorry then? No, he bet they wouldn't. Nobody loved him. There was a hole in his pants pocket. Nobody had mended it. Well, he didn't care. He'd just show that hole to everybody in the glen and let people see how neglected he was. His wrongs surged up and overwhelmed him. Tick-tack, 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 went the old grandfather clock in the hall that had been brought to Ingleside after Grandfather Blythe's death. A deliberate old clock dating from the days when there was such a thing as time. Generally, Jem loved it. Now he hated it. It seemed to be laughing at him. Ha ha, bedtime is coming. The other fellows can go to the harbor mouth, but you go to bed. Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha. Why did he have to go to bed every night? Yes, why? Susan came out on her way to the glen and looked tenderly at the small, rebellious figure. You needn't go to bed till I get back, little Jem, she said indulgently. I ain't going to bed tonight, said Jem fiercely. I'm going to run away. That's what I'm going to do, old Susan Baker. I'm going to go and jump into the pond, old Susan Baker. Susan did not enjoy being called old, even by little Jem. She stalked away in a grim silence. He did need a bit of disciplining. The shrimp, who had followed her out, feeling a yearning for companionship, squatted down on his black haunches before Jem, but got only a glare for his pains. Clear out, sitting there on your bottom staring like Auntie Mary Maria. Scat! Oh, you won't you? Then take that! Jem shied Shirley's little tin wheelbarrow that was lying handily near, and the shrimp fled with a plaintive yowl to the sanctuary of the sweetbriar hedge. Look at that. Even the family cat hated him. What was the use of going on living? Ugh! He picked up the candy lion. Nan had eaten the tail and most of the hindquarters, but it was still quite a lion. Might as well eat it. It might be the last lion he'd ever eat. By the time Jen had finished the lion and licked his fingers, he had made up his mind what he was going to do. It was the only thing a fellow could do when a fellow wasn't allowed to do anything. Chapter 6. Why in the world is the house lighted up like that? Exclaimed Anne when she and Gilbert turned in at the gate at 11 o'clock. Company must have come. But there was no company visible when Anne hurried into the house, nor was anyone else visible. There was a light in the kitchen, in the living room, in the library, in the dining room, in Susan's room, in the upstairs hall, but no sign of an occupant. What do you suppose? Began Anne, but she was interrupted by the ringing of the telephone. Gilbert answered, listened for a moment, uttered an ejaculation of horror, and tore out without even a glance at Anne. Evidently something dreadful had happened, and there was no time to be wasted in explanations. Anne was used to this, as the wife of a man who waits on life and death must be. With a philosophical shrug, she removed her hat and coat. She felt a trifle annoyed with Susan, who really shouldn't have gone out and left all the lights blazing and all the doors wide open. Mrs. Doctor, dear, said a voice that could not possibly be Susan's, but was. Anne stared at Susan. Such as Susan, hatless, her gray hair full of bits of hay, her print dress shockingly stained and discolored, and her face... Susan, what has happened? Susan, little Jem has disappeared. Disappeared? Anne stared stupidly. What do you mean? He can't have disappeared. He has, gasped Susan, wringing her hands. He was on the side steps when I went to the glen. I was back before dark, and he was not there. At first, I was not scared, but I could not find him anywhere. I have searched every room in the house. He said he was going to run away. Nonsense, he wouldn't do that, Susan. You have worked yourself up unnecessarily. He must be somewhere about. He has fallen asleep. He must be somewhere around. I have looked everywhere. I have combed the grounds and the outhouses. Look at my dress. I remembered he always said it would be such fun to sleep in the hayloft, so I went there and fell through that hole in the corner into one of the mangers in the stable and lit on a nest of eggs. It is a mercy I did not break a leg. If anything can be a mercy when little Jem is lost. Anne still refused to feel perturbed. Do you think he could have gone to the harbor mouth with the boys after all, Susan? He has never disobeyed a command before, but... No, he did not, Mrs. Doctor dear. The blessed lamb did not disobey. I rushed down to Drew's after I had searched everywhere, and Bertie Shakespeare had just got home. He said Jem had not gone with him. The pit seemed to drop out of my stomach. You had trusted him to me, and I phoned Paxton's, and they said you had been there and gone. They did not know where. We drove to Lowbridge to call on the Parkers. I phoned everywhere I thought you could be. Then I went back to the village. The men have started out to search. Oh, Susan, was that necessary? Mrs. Doctor, dear, I had looked everywhere that child could be. Oh, what have I gone through this night? And he said he was going to jump into the pond. In spite of herself, a queer little shiver ran over Anne. Of course, Jem wouldn't jump into the pond. That was nonsense. But there was an old dory on it, which Carter Flagg used for trouting, and Jem might, in his defiant mood of the earlier evening, had tried to row about the pond in it. He had often wanted to. He might have fallen into the pond trying to untie the dory. All at once her fear took a terrible shape. And I haven't the slightest idea where Gilbert has gone, she thought wildly. What's all this fuss about? Demanded Aunt Mary Maria, suddenly appearing on the stairs, her head surrounded by a halo of primpers and her body encased in a dragon-embroidered dressing gown. Can't a body ever get a quiet night's sleep in this house? Little Jem has disappeared, said Susan again, too much in the grip of terror to resent Miss Blythe's tone. His mother trusted me. Anne had gone to search the house for herself. Jem must be somewhere. He was not in his room. The bed was undisturbed. He was not in the twins' room, in hers. He was nowhere in the house. Anne, after a pilgrimage from garret to cellar, returned to the living room in a condition that was suddenly akin to panic. I don't want to make you nervous, Anne, said Aunt Mary Maria, lowering her voice creepily, but have you looked in the rainwater hogshead? Little Jack McGregor was drowned in a rainwater hogshead in town last year. I looked there, said Susan with another wring of her hands. I took a stick and poked. Anne's heart, which had stood still at Aunt Mary Maria's question, resumed operations. Susan gathered herself together and stopped wringing her hands. She remembered too late that Mrs. Doctor dear should not be upset. Let us calm down and pull together, she said in a trembling voice. As you say, Mrs. Doctor dear, he must be somewhere about. He cannot have dissolved into thin air. Have you looked in the coal bin? And the clock? Asked Aunt Mary Maria. Susan had looked in the coal bin, but nobody had thought of the clock. It was quite big enough for a small boy to hide in. Anne, not considering the absurdity of supposing that Jem would crouch there for 4 hours, rushed to it. But Jem was not in the clock. I had a feeling something was going to happen when I went to bed tonight, said Aunt Mary Maria, pressing both hands to her temples. When I read my nightly chapter in the Bible, the words, "You know what a day may bring forth," seemed to stand out from the page, as it were. It was a sign. You'd better nerve yourself to bear the worst, Annie. He may have wandered into the marsh. It's a pity we haven't a few bloodhounds. With a dreadful effort, Anne managed to laugh. I'm afraid there aren't any on the island, Auntie. If we had Gilbert's old setter Rex, who got poisoned, he would soon find Jem. I feel sure we are all alarming ourselves for nothing. Tommy Spencer and Carmody disappeared mysteriously 40 years ago and was never found. Or was he? Well, if he was, it was only his skeleton. This is no laughing matter, Annie. I don't know how you can take it so calmly. The telephone rang. Anne and Susan looked at each other. I can't go to the phone, Susan, said Anne in a whisper. I cannot either, said Susan flatly. She was to hate herself all her days for showing such weakness before Mary Maria Blythe, but she could not help it. 2 hours of terrified searching and distorted imaginations had made Susan a wreck. Aunt Mary Maria stalked to the telephone and took down the receiver, her crimpers making a horned silhouette on the wall, which Susan reflected, in spite of her anguish, looked like the old Nick himself. Carter Flagg says they have searched everywhere but found no sign of him yet, reported Aunt Mary Maria coolly. But he says the dory is out in the middle of the pond with no one in it as far as they can ascertain. They are going to drag the pond. Susan caught Anne just in time. No, I'm not going to faint, Susan, said Aunt Anne through white lips. Help me to a chair. Thanks. We must find Gilbert. If James is drowned, Annie, you must remind yourself that he's been spared a lot of trouble in this wretched world, said Aunt Mary Maria, by way of administering further consolation. I'm going to get the lantern and search the grounds again, said Anne as soon as she could stand up. Yes, I know you did, Susan, but let me. I cannot sit still and wait. You must put a sweater on then, Mrs. Doctor dear. The hair is heavy dew and the air is damp. I will get your red one. It is hanging on the chair in the boys' room. Wait you here till I bring it. Susan hurried upstairs. A few moments later, something that could only be described as a shriek echoed through the Ingleside. Anne and Aunt Mary Maria rushed upstairs where they found Susan laughing and crying in the hall, nearer to hysterics than Susan Baker had ever been in her life or ever would be again. "Mrs. Doctor, dear, he's there. Little Jem is there, asleep on the window seat behind the door. I never looked there. The door hid it, and when he wasn't in his bed..." Anne, weak with relief and joy, got herself into the room and dropped on her knees by the window seat. In a little while, she and Susan would be laughing over their own foolishness, but now there could be only tears of thankfulness. Little Jem was sound asleep on the window seat with an afghan pulled over him, his battered teddy bear in his little sunburned hands, and a forgiving shrimp stretched across his legs. His red curls fell over the cushion. He seemed to be having a pleasant dream, and Anne did not mean to waken him, but suddenly he opened his eyes that were like hazel stars and looked at her. "Jem, darling, why aren't you in your bed? We've been a little alarmed. We couldn't find you, and we never thought of looking here. I wanted to lie here because I could see you and Daddy drive in at the gate when you got home. It was so lonesome I just had to go to bed." Mother was lifting him in her arms, carrying him to his own bed. It was so nice to be kissed, to feel her tucking the sheets about him with those caressing little pats that gave him such a sense of being loved. Who cared about seeing an old snake tattooed anyhow? Mother was so nice, the nicest mother anybody ever had. Everybody in the Glen called Bertie Shakespeare's mother Mrs. Second Skimmings because she was so mean, and he knew, for he'd seen it, that she slapped Bertie's face for every little thing. "Mummy," he said sleepily, "of course I'll bring you Mayflowers next spring, every spring. You can depend on me." "Of course I can, darling," said Mother. "Well, since everyone is over their fit of fidgets, I suppose we can draw a peaceful breath and go back to our beds," said Aunt Mary Maria, but there was some shrewish relief in her tone. "It was very silly of me not to remember the window seat," said Anne. "The joke is on us, and the doctor will not let us forget it. You may be certain, Susan. Please phone Mr. Flagg that we've found Jem." "And a nice laugh he will have on me," said Susan happily. "Not that I care. He can laugh all he likes since little Jem is safe." "I could do with a cup of tea," sighed Aunt Mary Maria plaintively, gathering her dragons about her spare form. "I'll get it in a jiffy," said Brusen briskly. "We will all feel the sprightlier for one. Mrs. Doctor dear, when Carter Flagg heard little Jem was safe, he said, 'Thank God! I shall never say a word against that man again, no matter what his prices are.' And don't you think we might have a chicken dinner tomorrow, Mrs. Doctor dear, just by way of a little celebration, so to speak? And little Jem shall have his favorite muffins for breakfast." There was another telephone call, this time from Gilbert to say that he was taking a badly burned baby from the Harbor Head to the hospital in town and not to look for him till morning. Anne bent from her window for a thankful good-night look at the world before going to bed. A cool wind was blowing in from the sea. A sort of moonlit rapture was running through the trees in the hollow. Anne could even laugh, with a quiver behind the laughter, over their panic of an hour ago and Aunt Mary Maria's absurd suggestions and ghoulish memories. Her child was safe. Gilbert was somewhere battling to save another child's life. Dear God, help him and help the mother. Help all mothers everywhere. We need so much help with the little sensitive, loving hearts and minds that look to us for guidance and love and understanding. The friendly enfolding night took possession of Ingleside, and everybody, even Susan, who rather felt that she would like to crawl into some nice, quiet hole and pull it in after her, fell asleep under its sheltering roof.